Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the show. On this episode, I'm speaking to two guests who specialise in mitigating a particular form of human risk. James MacPherson and Elisa Lynch work in safety, the kind that stops people getting killed or injured on building sites, rather than the cyber kind. I invited them on the show because they're both very active on social media and have their own podcasts, so I knew they'd be interesting and insightful. But it was a comment by James on another podcast that really got me thinking. There he mentioned the term trickle-down safety, which is something he credited to Elisa. As you'll hear, the idea behind it is that the way safety rules flow from regulators to those on building sites is often when larger firms interpret the rules and then impose them on smaller contractors that work for them. Now that might sound like a good idea, but in practice there are some challenges. So I wanted to find out more about this because this isn't just relevant to the safety industry. It's a technique that regulators deploy in many other contexts, for example in supply chains, where you exert influence on larger organizations in the hope that that will then work its way down to other areas where you potentially have less influence. Whether that works or not is an interesting question. Now, what begins with a conversation about trickle-down safety soon shifts, as it so often does on this show, into other areas. Before we begin, a warning, the episode contained lots of adult language, so if you've got little people within earshot, it might be a good idea to put some headphones on or come back to it at a later time. What you're about to hear are some no-punches-pulled insights into why well-intended regulation can often not deliver the desired impact on the ground and the challenges organisations have in managing that. So please enjoy, as I know you will, my discussion with James MacPherson and Elisa Lynch on trickle-down safety. James and Elisa, welcome to the Human Risk Podcast.
Thanks.
Hello. I'm really excited to have both of you here, and we'll come on to talk about what prompted me to get you both on. But before we do that, probably a good idea to get you to introduce yourself to my listeners. So let's start with you, Elisa. Can you just tell my listeners a little bit about yourself?
I can. My name is Elisa Lynch. I am based in the beautiful West Cork in Ireland, and I have been knocking around the health and safety space for probably about 10 years now. Mostly construction safety is kind of my background. And yeah, that's me. That's enough.
Awesome.
That's loads.
That's lovely. James?
Hello, my name is James MacPherson. I also work in safety, but in loads of industries really, but typically obviously manufacturing and construction. I do that mostly now out of my own consultancy called Riskfluent. I also run an app company called Risk Assessor. Also run like a little community for safety people, and also have a podcast called Rebranding Safety. So my entire life is literally just safety 24/7.
I'm like, oh, I didn't say about my podcast. I'm like, damn it.
I did think I nearly said, and your podcast, but I was like, maybe still want to mention it or whatever.
Elisa, apparently you have a podcast. Tell us about it.
What? Yes, I have a podcast with the wonderful Crystal Danbury called Speak, where we speak about shit. So come find us. That's it.
Brilliant. So there's absolutely no pressure on me because you are both podcast aficionados. Links to all of those things will be in the show notes as ever. But actually, it was a podcast that started this particular episode on because, James, I heard you talking on another podcast, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. And you mentioned that both of you have been talking there about something called trickle-down safety. And I was just really intrigued by this concept. So to start us off, can you explain what that is? And then let's get into a conversation about that.
It came from, so Elisa coined the term, so I'll probably let her describe on how she defines the term, but it came from a conversation that Elisa and I are having over WhatsApp voice notes, and it was probably a few months ago now, and we were essentially, obviously we were moaning because that's pretty much all we do on voice notes, but essentially we were kind of moaning about how pretty much safety is kind of missing out. The majority of my perception of the conversation was that we're missing out the majority of the British, well, the economy, but I work in Britain, but most of the British economy, with them being like medium to small to even like micro businesses, because essentially they just can't afford safety advice or help or whatever, and there's always a paywall. So the way that we do it is actually from the big customers or the big principal contractors or whatever in the chain, and they force their version of safety down the supply chain, if that makes sense. Of which Elisa coined the amazing term trickle-down safety. So I'll probably hand over to Elisa and let her define it a bit better than that.
Yeah, actually, when you had when I heard the clip of you saying, "Oh, Lisa coined this," I was like, I don't remember this at all. But
Oh
yeah,
shit! The
I
one
know.
time I gave you credit.
And I was like, yes, it was me. I'm very intelligent. I compared it to trickle-down economics because I'm so fucking smart. That's what basically, yes, you're I think, but that is what I meant. This idea of the kind of industry leaders, and I suppose I do look at it through a construction lens. So those kind of tier one contractors who they do create the rules, like they create systems far beyond any legislative requirements, and then they set what they think they believe to be best practice and expect that people will fall in line. And I suppose for a lot of this, or some of it, they do, because smaller businesses aren't going to get work with those contractors if they don't fall in line. But it just doesn't. A lot of times, it doesn't fit, and it doesn't meet the business's needs. It's not in context.
And I thought this was really interesting because it resonated with me, because I think this happens a lot in a host of different fields. And you could pick, my background of compliance. And I think generally speaking, it's framed often as a good thing, right? So big companies will enforce ethical standards. And so things can happen. That's the positive spin on it. But what you're basically saying is this is actually a nightmare, because you've got a large organization who is, for whom this stuff is manageable. And so they basically just, if you want to do business with us, you need to adhere to our standards and rules. And therefore, we're just going to impose that on you and kind of take it or leave it. And so anybody that is, and I have this when I work with clients, where I'm a company of one, I supply things and I have to, they ask me for my diversity policy and those sorts of questions. And that's a sort of slightly silly example because that's relatively easy for me to solve. But these sorts of things you're talking about are quite a big challenge. And so far from being a positive thing, this is quite challenging and comes with some unintended consequences.
Yeah, I would say so. And I do kind of scoff a bit at the whole ethical element of it as well, because it's far from ethical. But it's people just don't really want to look at it or don't want to think about it too hard, or you'll start to realize how unethical it actually is, and the pressure and the stress that is caused by these onerous requirements on these smaller businesses is fucking unhinged, to be honest. So,
and give us an example of the sort of thing, and why it's problematic.
I can give you a simple example. A really simple example is, particularly in England, I don't know how this works everywhere else in the world, but ultimately in England, you've got something called SSIP, which is an accrediting body, is a very good idea. So SSIP stands for Safety Schemes in Procurement. So the whole idea is that anyone that works in safety or contractor management will know that you have to do some due diligence in that process and make sure that they're good at what they do, right? So you're not hiring people who don't know what they're doing, right? So this is a competency thing. Yeah, exactly. And the whole concept of SSIP, in my opinion, makes so much sense in that instead of me having to, let's say I'm the small business, I'm the engineering, I'm the fabricator, right? And I just go around loads of different buildings fabricating. Instead of me sending essentially the same policies, the same management system, the same certificates, insurance to all of these different companies, I upload it to one portal, say, for example, Chaz in the UK, and they audit it and they give me a badge. And then I can go to every other business and say I'm Chaz approved, and they go, great. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't mean you as the client do nothing. That's probably another conversation. But ultimately, it means that it's a bit quicker of a process. I'm not having to do these PQQ over and over and over again. makes perfect sense, right? In reality, it's not worked like that because it's become very much a commercial thing. So Chaz competes with Smaz and Smaz competes with Safe Contractor and all of these people. And what they do is they'll go to the big brands, and I don't know if it's a commercial relationship, either like they're paid on, they get a kickback for all of the people that sign up for it. I don't know. But ultimately, that company will dictate that they only accept Chaz. And then I've got a £2 million contract with Mace. So they say I have to have, okay, cool. Then I get a £6 million contract with Skanska, and they say, no, we don't like Chaz, we like Safe Contractor. Okay, so I have to go to Safe Contractor. And then CBRE go, no, we don't like that, we like Construction Line, so I have to go to... So, and you can literally see it. You can be stuck in a traffic jam and you'll see Bob's fabrication on a van, and on the back of it, you'll see what I call safety for scouts, which is just like badges, just shitloads
That's what
of
those
badges.
funny little badges
That's what
are.
they
I
are.
see. Okay. Right.
And it's just like it's literally like safety for scouts in that, you so I can tie my shoelaces, get a badge, tie it to my sash. And it's just, and it achieves nothing, in my opinion. And it's become this thing where we're collecting back badges. But ultimately, if you think about it in the context of a small business, margins are tight. We don't have a lot of money. And I'm now having to pay like sometimes a lot of money for all of these different schemes. I've had one customer that's got 6 different ones. 6. It's just like, what? And they're all the same.
They're all the same, and they're all onerous as well. Of like that,
Yeah.
it's thing of what is your diversity policy? It's like there's 4 of us, mate. Like,
Yeah.
and it's a mandatory field. You cannot pass until you put something in that box, until you upload a policy. So then you go and you generate a bullshit policy just to get past it. And to be honest, like, how many of these accredited bodies are actually looking at these in details or going, tick, they've got something in there. I see a PDF that has been uploaded. Happy days.
And that was ultimately the other next knock-on problem here, is that actually my business spends a hell of a lot of time actually arguing with the people in these auditing processes, where they're like, you need to do a construction phase plan. I'm like, no, they don't. They're not the principal contractor. They're not the sole contractor. Oh, no, they do. No, they don't. And you just go back and forth and back and forth. And I'm just like, who am I talking to here? Do you have any understanding of the legislation? It's just frustrating, and it's a waste of time. And ironically, it's taken us away from the thing that we should be doing, which is actually managing the risk of the work, right? It's so annoying.
Right. So what we've got here really is something in theory, of course, right. So we want, of course, and we can argue about whether it makes sense for small companies to have diversity policy, all those sorts of things. But generally speaking, there is some sense behind making sure that people are competent and able to do the job. But what we've got is the way that that's been implemented is this commercial process. So it's not a single government body. It's a commercial process that's set up clearly to make money. And so in order to do that, you're then having to submit to a variety of different things. And so you've got 2 things here. One is silly, what I would loosely term sort of silly questions, because they just don't apply. The second thing is the multiplicity of those.
Yeah.
But there's also like the whole conversation of like, some of it, I just sit here and go, we all know this is achieving absolutely fuck all, but it feels like no one wants to address it. Like, I can get on site because I've got a CSCS card, but it's just this like assumption, CSCS card, competent, off you go. And to get a CSCS card, it's like, go and sit a test, go and do a test, which actually is quite hard to pass, which we automatically go, that means we're better, which is not. The questions are like,
Badly written. That's why they're fucking hard to answer, because I don't know who wrote them, but they're terrible.
I honestly failed on one because I didn't know that apparently pigeon becomes a protected species if there's a bird of prey seen in the area, because then the pigeon is food for that bird of prey.
That was on CSCS.
And that was on CSCS. And I'm like, what the fuck? And it's just this whole thing that's just like, we're doing all of this stuff, spending all of this money, forcing all of these standards. And ultimately, all of this stuff's been out for like a decade, and really construction still kills more people than everyone a year, still gives people silica damage than anyone else every year. So we just seem to not want to entertain a conversation that maybe this isn't working.
And I mean, for me, this is fascinating because one, it's not a space I'm particularly familiar with. I mean, I am as a customer of the industry in the sense of I get a builder in, but of course I'm not asking those sorts of questions. But the dynamics you've talked about are very, very common, where we basically, it starts with let's be generous to the people that create the regulations in the first place that require this. So starts with a good idea, which is we want to make sure people are competent. But the way it manifests itself is disproportionate and burdensome, and actually, I think leaves one in a position based on the descriptions you've given, where there's a lack of respect for the authority. This isn't about improving standards. Actually, it feels like it's just improving bureaucracy and creating additional management processes that if anything, just piss people off and incur huge costs and don't improve safety.
Well, welcome to health and safety. Shitloads of rules that piss people off. Like that's
Come on in.
Come on in. It's great here.
But I mean, everything you say, it's, as I say, I'm not experienced in that space, but I just recognize it from other contexts. We get similar, whether you're looking at the sort of compliance space where you've got, anti-money laundering requirements, disproportionate questions there that, again, might make sense. If you're a large supplier who's got the infrastructure to be able to handle these sorts of questions and who poses some of these risks, then you could sort of go, okay, that's a legitimate question. But one size definitely doesn't fit all. And I think it's really interesting. And that's why I love the idea of trickle down, because it might have made sense at the top of the waterfall and be beneficial. By the time it gets down to those lower levels, it makes no sense whatsoever.
I'm just like, are we really that naive that forcing a sole trader builder to have a modern slavery policy is actually gonna stop modern slavery? Like, it's just this constant, like, where I just want to sit in these boardrooms and go like, are you fucking serious? Like, do you think that's going to help? Or really, are you just lazy and you don't want to do it properly? Because ultimately, to actually manage all of these really complex risks is fucking hard work. And for me, I just think no one wants to actually do it.
I was actually having a modern slavery discussion with a contractor a couple of weeks ago. And so we're on a site, and it's like the site is jam-packed with operatives from country in Eastern Europe, and they're going on about gloves and glasses and dental and all this stuff. And I was like, right, okay. I was like, but how much are these lads being paid? They're like, what? I was like, how much are they being paid? They're like, what? Why do you want to talk about that? I was like, well, you've just hauled someone over the coals for modern slavery policy, so like, is that not a relevant topic right now? And they're like standing there in the middle of this field in the rain being like, and you could tell they were just like, would you ever fuck off? Like, they just didn't want to. And they were like, why is that even relevant? Like, we're way past that point. Like, that's all been sorted out in the pre-quals. I was like, okay. Yeah, sure. Let's talk about the gloves and fucking glasses then. Right.
And sometimes you kind of, you're reading this stuff as well, Elisa, you'll be the same, but and you just kind of want to go, have you ever actually been on a construction site? Like, have you ever met, like, have you ever been there and spoke to these people and actually understood it and appreciated, like, the working work? Now, I'm not endorsing what I'm about to say next, but it is interesting that ultimately, if you wanted to solve something like modern slavery, if you wanted to increase kind of control over standards of PPE, then directly employ the entire workforce, because you're currently just going subcontract. The whole construction industry in the UK, at least, is set up as everyone's a sole trader, and it just trickles down this responsibility down the line. And they're all sitting there being like, oh, you need to have a modern slavery policy. If you're that worried about it, fucking direct employ everybody. Now, I'm not endorsing that, because all of my mates are like sole trader, and they would be like, James, shut the fuck up. But ultimately, if you want to do something about it, do that. But you wouldn't, because it would turn up the whole industry. But just no one actually wants to do real work here to actually solve some of the problems.
What we've basically got here is a structure that sort of I question whether does it look sensible in theory. Don't know, but it certainly when it sort of hits the ground level, you're basically saying it's ineffective. And people, if they thought about it, you'd go, well, actually, this isn't working. Right? This can't
Mm,
possibly deliver in the real world.
mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Because it's frustrating because for me it's so obvious that it's just not working. Like, and I think the problem is that ultimately there's kind of a lot of recency bias going on. I think in that I've been on a construction site X amount of times in the last 6 months and I'm not dead yet. So it's kind of like can't be that bad. Oh, and then we're all sitting here being like, oh, it's so bad, and it's just like. It's hard because I think we try to tie it to like really big events and big like statements of things going wrong. But ultimately, if you were going to kind of follow the chain, if I was in a manufacturing site and they were like, oh, this set of tool, we're going to roll out some drills for everybody and everyone's getting electric shock off the drills, you'd be like, okay, these drills are obviously shit. Let's buy better quality of drills. Can't do that in construction because everyone buys their own tools and everyone brings their own stuff. And the quality of that varies on that person. My mate, who's a brickie, is like a perfectionist, like geek, and everything is immaculate and it's all the same brand and it's beautiful. Then I know another mate that literally will just be like, man, I've had this drill for like 300 years. My granddad made it back in the day, but it still works. And there's no sense, like we're creating a false sense of control, but it's really hard to argue against that because inherently a construction site feels safe, I think, sometimes.
So,
Maybe not Elisa.
some of them do. Some of you walk in and you go, oh, fuck, you're a danger girl, get out. But like, I don't know. And it's just even when you're talking about like drills and things like that, and then I just have flashbacks of just arguments then with clients who like, did you tag all the laptops in the side office? I'm like, oh, fuck off. I actually can't cope with this. You know, where it's just really over the top, bureaucratic shite. Like, you need to tag the laptops every 3 months. I'm like, I literally do not need to do that. That's not a requirement anywhere. And it's like, well, those are our requirements. And this is separate to the whole, like, this is a whole separate issue of the trickle-down thing of these rules that are over the top. This isn't even your whole kind of pre-qualification competency assurance stuff. This is just actually how a lot of the main players operate within the construction industry, that they create these rules and these policies that are unhinged, that literally make no sense. They don't manage risks. They're not, they seem to be more about clout and control of, just control of companies than actually controlling risk or managing risk.
So this isn't sort of a matter of health and safety. This is just like how we like to do, how things are done around here. That's decided by the large player, the big beast, if you like. And therefore, if you want to work with them, you are required to do stuff that, you know, to your point around laptops, for example, that doesn't sound to me like it's going to save anyone's life or stop anything particularly
Well,
bad.
there's one time in 1995, this one got like, fuck, that's exactly the response you get.
Right.
Like, it's on the absolute off chance. Like, they'll go, well, is there a risk of it happening? You're like, well, look, there's a risk of fucking anything happening. But like, are we focusing on the important risk? Are we focusing on the stuff that's like legitimately probably going to kill someone? Or are we tagging laptops in the side office and getting into like email wars about it and quoting legislation of why I'm right and why you're wrong? Yes, this is recent. Yes, I did that. But it's just, yeah.
I think a lot of it is kind of like productive procrastination. In a way, it's kind of like we're procrastinating dealing with these really big, complex, like sometimes costly problems. Let's take construction dust, for example. A lot of people trying to do stuff and talking about it, but ultimately to fix that problem, it's a lot of work and it's a big, complicated issue to deal with. So we can't do that. So what we'll do is we'll just be really productive over here and let's go tag some laptops, make sure all the builders have got a DSE assessment because they use a laptop once a week. Or, do you know what I mean? We feel like we're achieving something because it kind of maybe subconsciously distracts us from we're not actually dealing with these really big fucking issues over here.
To your point about, so look at us, there are so many, how complex is it? Or is it just fucking more expensive? You know?
Like, yeah, it's more expensive.
It's more expensive. Lads chasing walls and all this, and it's like, design it out. design it out?
Mm.
Why are we still designing buildings where you're having lads coming in or people, anyone coming in, chasing walls for conduits, and you're like, just fucking design it so that this doesn't have to happen. Like,
Another example is
It's
like domestic roofers. Domestic roofers, like, so we do a lot of work at height in our company, but we don't have any domestic roofers because domestic roofers they're not in this trickle down chain, right? Because they're working B to C. They're working with the homeowner typically, right? So, Dorothy is not going, oh, could you send me around? They're not driven by the contractor in this trickle down thing. So they kind of get left out. But like, if you look at any domestic roofer, right, they're not going to be tied on. They might have scaffolding, but not all of them do. Scaffolding's going to like add 10 grand to the budget, so it's a lot of cost. Then Dorothy might go, oh, I can't afford another 10 grand or whatever. So it becomes a little bit costly, a little bit complicated. But I actually had a conversation, to Elisa's point, with an architect a couple of days ago. And I said, why don't you design into new houses an anchor point on the top of the roof for the roofer in the future that has to do some work on the roof? Because I need to have some geezer just literally touch up a bit of cement on my chimney breast. And I'm standing there watching him. And he literally is just like going up and down this ladder in some trackies, no harness, no nothing, standing on the roof. And I'm like, oh, I feel a bit hypocritical now because I also don't want to pay him like 900 quid for scaffolding just to be up there for 5 minutes. It feels silly. But if an architect just went, let's put a little man-safe line on there, and then, okay, you've got the argument of who's going to pay to maintain it. But like ultimately, it's only going to be painful for like the first couple of years. Next generation, it's just a given that you have to maintain this thing on the top of your roof. You've now solved your problem. Everyone working at height on your roof.
What did the architect say?
I won't mention his name, but he went, never thought of that before.
You fucking didn't because you're an architect, because you don't design safely.
I said to him, isn't it a legal requirement for you to consider the maintenance of the building and the cleaning of the building? He was like, oh, yeah, but like, come on. And I was just like, do you know what? Fucking hell. What? Like, so, I don't know. There's just, I think sometimes the solution seems simple, but we just over here being productive, doing shit. We are doing shit that may or may not need doing, but we're doing shit. But it's not actually solving the problem. So it's kind of productive. Yeah, or just productive procrastination is kind of what I call it.
But it's funny because it strikes me. I mean, I always talk about the term, theatre, where you're doing something for performative reasons. And sometimes that makes a lot of sense. If I take totally different context, right? Airport security, I always say, on the one hand, you could go, well, it's a bit rubbish, it's a bit inefficient, right? But it serves the purpose of deterring bad people from doing bad things. And we all feel safer as a result because we know we've gone through a process where we feel like there's something going on there. So so anybody that's involved in that particular process, you could say it could be run more slickly, it's a bit irritating, but actually it does what it needs to do. Yep. And therefore we all feel safer about flying. And there haven't been any major incidents really since 9/11. So sort of job done. There's lots of other forms of theatre where you go, that is a complete waste of time, right? We all know it's bullshit. We go through the motions and it seems pointless. And what you're talking about here is far more of the latter, right? A load of sort of processes that just, I don't know, in theory keeps people happy. It looks like we've done a load of things, but actually it's costing a ton of money. It's not really delivering anything. And we're not really thinking about the real world or simple solutions. It's complex and over-engineered. Is that fair?
Is it
Is it fair, James?
I just keep coming back to this thing in my head that was just fucking lazy. Like, it's just lazy. I think a lot of it is. I was thinking, if you were to look at any court case from the HSE in the UK, it will say, I can guarantee it will say, failure to suitably and sufficiently risk assess the work. That's what it will say. 99.9% of risk assessments I've ever come across are shite.
Yeah.
They are shite. They're not fair. They don't achieve anything. Like, it doesn't even, I'd probably say it does demonstrate and get you on site, but like, I know a company that pays, I think, a couple of £100 a year to a website to download risk assessments and method statements, and they've not once been rejected. And he genuinely turned around to me and said, James, why would I pay you a month what I pay this website a year to have better risk assessments when I'm already getting on site. So it's like this whole thing of trickle down safety, and these big contractors think they're making a safer site. They're not, because that person blew someone up a couple of months ago. So
it's basically just it's box ticking, right? By the sounds of things.
Without a doubt, there is an enormous amount of box ticking going on. There is some really good work that goes on as well, but there is a lot of box ticking and a lot of arse covering, and people going, well, if we have the paper, like if we have the document, and that's they're looking for the document. They're not looking beyond the document. They're not looking even at what the document says. So people have attached this notion of control to the paperwork. But it doesn't match reality. It doesn't matter what's physically being done in the workplace. It doesn't match a lot of the time. And visually it might match. So you might walk onto even like some of these tier 1 sites, and they're clean. So they've got all the good kind of indicators, like they're clean. Everyone's wearing 5 pints of PPE for some fucking reason, wear gloves to walk around the place, but whatever. So like, they've got all these kind of visual, like tick, 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 this all looks good. And then there's just like something going off around the corner in a lift shaft somewhere that is absolutely, or like the Saturday jobs that have to get done when there's less people on site. That stuff happens on every contract. I'd be surprised if there was anyone who could say it doesn't.
Yeah, you got a really nice canteen, but there's some geezer snorting construction dust around the corner. Like it's just like what? Or you got a lift plan that like doesn't even consider the structural integrity of the ground or anything like that, and you're just like, meh. Because ultimately, it costs a lot of fucking money to get someone to check the structural integrity of the ground or something like that. It's frustrating.
And so, what's the solution? Because you've posited, I'll put it simply, you've posited common sense, right? But clearly, if it were that simple, I mean, the thing about common sense is it's not that common, right? But like, how does one start to look at solving that?
Let's see, Christian, if we knew the answer to that, right?
Elisa writing a book called Trickle-Down Safety, so you'll have to wait a couple.
Transcript of ranty voice notes.
Yeah.
But,
hey, that could work.
Solving it's there's a lot of like, I think we are talking probably about 2 separate issues here. Like you've the bureaucratic issue, and then the whole like risk and safety, which is generally like a wicked problem. Like there is no one solution, there is no one answer, there is no silver bullet. But I think that on the bureaucratic side, people don't want to know that it is as big a problem. And often they don't realize how big is a problem until they end up in court and realize, oh, actually all our documents are shit and they don't mean anything. And then that then turns into this whole fear factor of, oh, but you got to have this because if you end up in court, and then it just is this self-sustaining shitstorm of bureaucracy. So I don't know how we solve it, to be honest, but people really need to start looking at what is the purpose of this? What is the process? Are they connected? And if they're not, we need to change it. But I don't think there's enough people talking about it. There's not enough people talking about it. There's just a lot of busy fools doing bullshit jobs, pushing paper around the place.
Ultimately as well, I don't think the economy can afford it.
Oh, God, no. God, no. If we to do everything like absolutely even right, and like the legislation is the fucking bare minimum, right? The bare minimum. That's not even all the other bureaucratic shite we've just spoken about. And if we were to do everything by the legislation, like how far would we get? I don't know.
Yeah. The whole thing, like, do you know what? I love to compare safety to finance, right? Because ultimately, if you look at those 2 professions, in answer to your question, Christian, there isn't, to Elisa's point, there is kind of no one solution. But ultimately, there's a lot of little things that we could tweak and improve. But we currently monitor and measure safety and celebrate success of safety based off the absence of negatives, which any of us that have read Eric's work will have all preached about that, right? Yeah. But we're still fucking doing that. Like, I don't know how many more times we need to go, yeah, that's fucking stupid. Why would you just go, there's no... But to compare it to finance, that would literally be like me ringing my accountant or the financial controller in the room, in the boardroom, going, the agenda item, James, finance, please. Yep, all good. Haven't gone bankrupt this month. Great. Thank you, James. Crack on. You wouldn't do that. If I told you how many things monitor finance in my business, it would be phenomenal. Like this spreadsheet, this thing, this thing, this thing. And it's just like, but in safety, we're just going, yep, nothing's gone wrong. So there's that problem that I think we could address, and we could start solving that. Ultimately, the bodies of safety don't seem to want to drive this conversation much either, or not in depth. They maybe pay it a bit of lip service, but they don't really want to. They don't want to address this. I'm talking professional bodies and the enforcing body. For me, I don't think either of those are really pushing this conversation. Two, I think ultimately we've got this big problem that most industries are still a race to the bottom. So if you get a race to the bottom, you're always going to have a problem in that you've got to do it quick, fast and cheap. And safety conflicts with all three of those. So if I'm saying to a customer, like, I get what you're saying, you can't really afford to send somebody to do a risk assessment specifically for that site because it's what we might call small works or something like that, where the margin is like 2% and they're getting paid £100 or whatever. So to send someone to risk assess that, the margin's shot. So you just like, some of this stuff, you genuinely can't do it to the standard that maybe we would want it to do it. And then sometimes doing a site-specific risk assessment is too much at the same time because we are just going to the same thing at this place. So there's you can't just say site-specific risk assessment everywhere. Next problem you've got is most of our legislation, particularly in the UK, is arguably not very good in my opinion. Like, some of it is outstanding. Some of it is fucking amazing. Like Health Safety at Work Act. Oh, flawless piece of kit. Like even the Management of Safety at Work Act, regs, I think those are really good. Rest of it, a bit questionable. Like noise at work regs don't make sense if you're not in a factory. Outside there just doesn't make sense. A lot of it doesn't really work and doesn't fit the industry of nowadays, if that makes sense. And there's case study after case study that show that. But we had a fucking great opportunity with this EU retained law bill in England where they were going to, basically the government was saying, right, if you don't sort it, we're just going to chuck it all out. And our response was, oh my God, no, let's do nothing. Instead of going, yeah, let's actually use that deadline to pull our finger out. No, we did nothing. Our bodies just fought against it and went, no, don't do that. Don't throw it all out. And then the government went, okay, yeah, I suppose that's, so yeah, let's just leave it.
So did they leave it in the end?
Yeah, they left. So basically there was this thing called the sunset clause in it. And the sunset clause would basically mean if it went over X date, they'd throw it all out. So RRSM, IOSH, ROSMA, all of those people campaigned to remove the sunset clause and said, we'll review it all, but don't put us on a tight deadline. If I was the government, I'd turn around and say, well, how long do you want? Because like you've done fuck all for the last like decade and a half. Like what are you going to do now?
Lads, but fucking well done.
So I think ultimately we've got a lot of problems, but I think the one thing that could make a difference is if one body just actually started to ask some really hard-hitting questions like, what are we doing? And it's got to be a big body because no one else will listen. Because you can't have like me and Elisa bitching and moaning on a fucking podcast every week. But,
you can, but it's not going to do anything, right?
Well, yeah, we'll carry on doing that. But ultimately, like, it's not going to drive that much change if I'm having to sit with my clients and saying, this is shit. And they're saying, well, this massive conglomerate of construction companies are part in it. I've now not got a leg to stand on.
Yeah.
But that's interesting because they can, if you look at it from the perspective of larger organizations, they've always got more to fear in the sense that if you've got deeper pockets, you're running bigger risk because people might sue you and inevitably when something goes wrong, you always look for the deepest pockets in the particular chain as there. So you can sort of understand the logic. If I'm working in a large organization where I have an infrastructure, so what's my position if I'm responsible for managing that risk? Well, I'll be risk averse. Right, I'll cover it. So whether you're talking to lawyers or whether you're talking to anybody whose job it is to cover that risk off, you can sort of see how in that environment you're gonna be incentivized to add on. But the point that you're making is when that hits on the ground, that makes no sense. So questionable whether that makes sense at that level. It sure as hell doesn't when it hits the
But also then it's a false sense of security, because if they're adding on and it doesn't work, then it doesn't work. Therefore, you're not covered. Like, this is the thing.
Yeah.
It's just that, like, thankfully, really bad accidents they're actually quite rare if you go by the hours of work across an economy. It's quite rare that a
Yep.
company will actually end up in court over something going wrong. So so things don't go wrong. So then they kind of go, oh yeah, we must be good, all good, happy days. This is all. Let's just keep doing what we're doing.
And that ultimately what makes this conversation really hard, because I've had this conversation really interestingly with a group of what I would call mature safety professionals, and one of them kind of shocked me in the moment when they turned around and say, to be honest, James, like, it's 130 deaths a year on average, just the cost of the economy. At first I was like, no, fuck off. But then I was like, do you know what? What a banging question that is. Like, the amount of hours that we work and how much houses we build and roofs that we fix and whatever. Is it just the cost of the economy? There's a fair question.
And it's a very
not a comfortable question.
It's very uncomfortable.
Yes.
And it's like, have we plateaued? Is this as good as we will ever get? And is this acceptable? Maybe it is. Who knows?
Well, it's interesting because if you take a different context, right, look at road safety
Or road unsafety.
So you get some transport authorities that say we want zero accidents. Now, it is possible to get zero accidents, but you've probably got to remove all human beings from it and chuck a whole load of stuff at it that is going to be disproportionate, that is hugely costly, is going to slow traffic. We'll reduce the speed limit to start with, right? So things can't go as far. So we can do a load of things to get us, probably can't get exactly to zero, but you can get pretty close to it if you really threw everything at it. But the costs of doing that are probably disproportionate. And I think what is really interesting is that when, we don't want to have these conversations. So, well, how many people do you want to kill in a year? That becomes a really unpleasant conversation. But we have that risk conversation with lots of other things where we sort of have to compromise and think about it from a societal perspective and say, well, actually, if we think about it, we do genuinely have what we might term a risk appetite for all activities, and say, well, here's an acceptable level. Now, that's very unpleasant when it comes to thinking about how, what does that mean for the individual humans and their families and everything else. But that's kind of how we run society. But that's a very awkward conversation to have. And I think the problem we've got is that there's this pretense of, on the one hand, we don't want to have that conversation. So we sort of avoid it. We design structures that pretend to solve problems, but don't actually do so. And for me, that's the tragedy here. Maybe as a society, we're not sophisticated enough to be able to have those conversations because it's unpleasant, it's not politically palatable. But that's the dynamic that we've got, I guess.
I find interesting that you went to road safety, actually, because I think that's a fascinating concept, in that we can go X amount of people. You can go to like a meeting of loads of people campaigning for road safety, and then that person just turned up in a V6 vehicle that goes like 300 miles an hour. And you're like, why have you got a car that goes that fast if you're that worried about road safety? Like, stop manufacturing cars that go over fucking 70 miles an hour then. Or when loads of people are breaking the speed limit, stop manufacturing cars that do that. We know we've got technology that can limit the speed of a vehicle based on the geofence. We know that can happen because we do that on plant, we do that on mobile plant, so we know that can happen. Make that a legal requirement. But I'm not saying do it, but what I'm saying is, like, there are the ability to do shit to genuinely fix the problem.
Yeah.
But we don't do it. It's the same as like forklift trucks in a warehouse or mobile plant on a construction site. Like, oh, we'll have high visors. Okay, fine. What's that doing other than fuck all? Like, because it costs a fucking shitload of money to segregate between the plant and the person. That would cost a lot of money. It would be a pain in the ass to like work out, as particularly on a construction site. So you just don't do it. So we must have a risk appetite, because we accept this stuff all the time, constantly going, yeah, that's fine. And if you do look at it like from a road safety point of view, cars are literally marketed on like how fast they can go. It doesn't specifically say goes 0 to 60 in X or goes to 200, but it's hinted and it's subtly marketed at us, buy this car because it's uber fast. And then particularly the male side of the world will kind of lap that up and be like, yeah, got this car. Look at it. It's like
And
fucking
why is
0
it
to
like
60. And
all car ads at the moment seem to have fucking like, do you know the way they've like, oh, horses. There's like somebody on horses like running along by there. And it's like
horsepower.
horsepower, great, but it's like,
Yeah.
first of all, this is stupid. Second of all, just fucking stop. It's just really annoying. They're all
Yeah. I've got a car that goes 200 miles an hour. All I do is go from home to the school, which has got a 20 mile per hour speed limit on anyway.
Like, are you fucking dragging trailers about it? No, you're not. Okay, you're literally going to Lidl. Calm down.
Your point, James, around like high vis, right? So what are we doing there? Well, theory one is if somebody's wearing a high vis vest, they're more likely to be seen. And so that might prevent accidents. And that's going to be hard to prove. But we do know that if there is an incident and there isn't a high vis, people will just be going, well, it should have been wearing a high vis. Maybe a high vis vest would have prevented it. And so you don't want to be in a position, either as a legislator or as anybody who's responsible for this, of being the person that decided it wasn't necessary, right? Because in theory, that might have prevented something from happening. And so it's looking at what does it look like when things go wrong, as opposed to how can we manage for the average situation and recognize that we can't control everything. And I think the car situation is another interesting one where you sort of think, well, with hindsight, when something goes wrong, we start to look and go, well, of course, all of these things are preventable. We look for reasons, excuses. All of this points to defensive decision making. And sort of what's the easiest path? Because we don't want to be confronted with the realities of things. And we want to, whoever's responsible for managing these processes wants an easy life, because we all do.
Mm. I think you also have to celebrate the car industry for making a car just inherently safe. Like, I can slag them off and say, like, oh, why make a car go 200 miles per hour? But the amount of advancement has gone into vehicles to like protect the human is phenomenal.
Sorry, to protect the men based on men body.
True. And it's generally to protect people inside the vehicle. There's less gone into protecting the people outside the vehicle. But you make that's a really good point, Elisa, around the men and listeners that haven't read Caroline Criado Perez's Invisible Women. Notes to that in the show notes. Should do so because you're absolutely right. They're designed around the male body as opposed to the female body.
But it's another safety thing where it's like we don't want to talk about the fact that we don't design shit for half of the population.
To the point where like bulletproof vests in the police force, like stab-proof vests, like just hurt women to wear essentially.
They don't fit.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But and ultimately, because a lot of this stuff, it's not an easy fix. Like it's a hard fix. Like in simple context, it's an easy fix. Someone just start making better clothing and shit like that, right? But ultimately, you've got an entire economy in a way, and mini economies are all built up around this shit that's just like fundamentally got flaws to it. So to fix the problem, we have to accept that it is really hard to fix a problem.
Them probably in our generation.
Yeah, which is massively depressing.
But it's like, but then we should be trying anyway.
Two sort of themes I pull out from that. One is the obstacle here is people, right? It's not that we don't have the capability to think about these things and try and devise solutions. It's ultimately the blocker is humans. Not wanting to do something, not wanting to recognize it, the costs, whatever it is, right? It's not top of our list of priorities, too expensive, blah, blah, blah. So there's that human impediment there. That's the challenge. And I think the second bit is to say that actually we have this vested interest in not changing things. And I'm not saying it's because people are actively setting out to kill people or to cause problems, but it's quite hard for us to shift from courses that we've plotted already and traditional ways of doing things. And either that's because we've invented it ourselves and we're, like it must be a good solution because we came up with it, or it's the thing we've always done, or we don't want to be the weirdos doing it slightly differently. And all of this stuff comes down to title of the podcast, human risk, right? It's human decision-making that's getting us here. And all of the things you've talked about are human dynamics.
Yeah. And it's funny that like in a lot of the other podcasts that we will be on, there's often the tagline of like, people are the solution. Conversation like, fuck me, they're not though. We are not picking it.
They're not. Yeah, they're all like they might not be the problem, but they are a pain in the fucking ass. And I do think as well, like this whole conversation of like people with a solution, people, I'm 100% on board, right? Totally get it. But like in practicality, rolling that stuff out, it is really fucking hard. And to actually then tangibly show some results is probably even harder. I mean, we've got like this selective science where like we're all got confirmation bias about what academic research we're talking about and referring to. I think you've got the argument to say like cookies and the internet, social media starts to exacerbate that, and even more in that you only see what you like anyway. So we're literally having cognitive diversity designed out of our brains, which is just another crazy concept. But you've got all of this stuff going on, and there's evidence out there to say that high vis is actually no scientific evidence to show they actually make us safer on site. Well, as far as I'm aware anyway, there is nothing. David Provan Drouet did a great episode on this on their podcast. And to be honest, what they're doing on there is another really good example of the good thing about social media and all of this stuff, in that one of the problems with safety in the small business world, which kind of where we started in this whole conversation, is that ultimately, yes, the humans dynamic is a big problem, but the other problem is paywalls, because humans are inherently trying to make money, right? If you want to buy my consultancy for X amount of days, it costs money because I have to pay for that person to pay their mortgage, and the rate is the rate. I can't say I'm only going to pay my guys £20 an hour when actually everyone else is paying like £50 an hour or whatever, because that's the kind of economy. So the cost is the cost. What Drew Ray and David Provan are doing really well is removing the paywall of academia. Because I want to access academia, but I can't because I've got to pay for all of these journals that cost a shitload of money. So I didn't do it. So I stopped looking at academia. They've now given me access that's free of charge in a medium that works for me. So like that's ultimately why we started Rerunning Safety on the YouTube side. The podcast was just for therapy for me so that I had somewhere to shout and moan. But the YouTube side was ultimately to try and remove the paywall of our advice and give free advice away. So all of these people out here that are safety professionals and they do this to make sure everyone goes home safe. Start a fucking YouTube channel, start a TikTok channel, start giving away free advice, because we've all got all of this advice, and there's this human dynamic there, which is just, I don't know, lazy, scared of somebody's whatever. I'm not sure, but there is an ability for us all to start making the world a bit of a better place by just giving shitload of advice away.
That's super interesting, because this is a context in which academic research can be directly applied in the real world. So there's lots of others where if you looked at some of the sort of behavioral science stuff, actually just because it works in a lab environment doesn't mean it'll automatically flow through the real world. But given you're talking about the laws of physics, for example, that drive a lot of health and safety requirements, recognizing that what works in the academic establishment is directly relevant. I think that's super interesting. I'd never thought about. I think the academic paywall stuff is outrageous. Literally, taxpayers' money is going in to fund academic institutions, and then somebody is taking, effectively, the academics are not getting paid for the research. It's trapped behind these paywalls. Nobody gets to see it. That's just outrageous as a matter of principle, that there's people out there, middle people making money. But in the way you've talked about it, that's even worse, right? Because this is stuff that could directly save lives that would be useful. This is kept away from people. And I as I say, I rail against usurious business models wherever I find them. But that's a particularly good example. I hadn't thought about that, but that's a terrible thing that's just not freely available to people, because that would save lives.
It's not accessible. So they did say in that because I used the high vis episode as an example, I believe if I remember rightly, both of them did say we need more research on this. But ultimately, their conclusion from the papers that they'd read to go and find if high vis actually make us safer concluded that actually there's no evidence to say they do. We'd be better off having high visibility kind of cuffs.
Wrists and ankles, isn't it?
Yeah, an ankle bracelet, because that's how biologically our eyes pick things up. Ironically, they said the best thing to do is move more. So many sites, rule is stand still and wait till the operator of the mobile plant acknowledges you. So it's like, do the fucking opposite of what the science says. And construction sites businesses don't have access to this stuff. Oh, well, to be honest, big business does 100%. They could afford it. But ultimately, it's not publicly available, promoted, shared. So people are not having these conversations.
But also, and I have to stick this rant in everywhere I can on every podcast, it's this stuff, this academic research is not discussed in curriculums, in how safety professionals are taught.
Yeah.
So then safety professionals go into those big businesses. I'm not expecting directors or QSs or any of the other people to know or understand this stuff. And they're the
Yeah.
people who are making the decisions that impact it. But the safety professionals are going in and they're not well versed in it. So how are they then educating the businesses when they're not educated themselves on any of this?
Yeah. I think there's a whole nother conversation there around the competence of the safety profession, in my opinion, is shite. And I'm one of them.
We haven't a clue what we're doing.
Yeah.
We haven't a fucking notion what we're doing, Christian. It's terrifying, to be honest.
But it's super interesting when you say, because when you point out, you sort of go, well, having this big sort of jacket that's full of fluorescent stuff, does that actually work? I could totally see. I mean, it seems slightly counterintuitive, right? Because you would think more reflective surfaces equals better.
Yeah.
But I am entirely willing to believe that that is not necessarily work, because that's a logical solution to problem, right? More fluorescent equals better thing. In the same way, we have these discussions around cycling helmets, right? Are they actually better or worse? Well, the answer is there is some evidence that says that actually, if you did make them mandatory and people were there, they pay more attention. We can argue it both ways. But bottom line is, I think this stuff is really interesting. And if we want to solve some of these challenges, we need to start recognizing that humans don't always behave logically in the way that we expect them to. And that's where I think actually academic research is really important, because that can help us to identify counterintuitive solutions. And to your point around cost, surely it's going to be cheaper just to have little ankle bracelets and normal bracelets than it is entire jackets. So there's an example. If that is more effective, then we can save some money in that space. And there's probably other things that we could stop doing. Now, admittedly, it'll also lead us to having to do more things. So it's not all going to be one way in a cost direction. But actually, I think that's a really interesting way of starting to do it. And so we need to democratize this stuff and put it out there so that people can try this in the wild. And so a little bit more risk taking in that sense, because any other context, R&D, we experiment with things to see what works. And that involves getting things wrong. And I'm not saying we take massive risks with people's lives all the time, but we're never going to progress if we don't try some of these things out in the wild. And the sense I've had from you really is that there's a huge sort of bureaucratic nature to this. Well, we'll just do what we've always done. We'll roll out this stuff. We're not totally sure if it's all working. That's not something that grows businesses and takes society forward. We're going to have more of an experimental mindset. What informs that? Academic research and a bit of experimentation in the field. And if that's not happening, then that's quite worrying, because we're just using techniques that are 20, 30 years old that we presume work.
That is literally safety in a nutshell, is that we are using stuff that's about 20, 30 years old and we have no idea whether it works or not.
And older.
And older. I mean, no idea if it works. And I mean, you could get a simple example of, like, we've got a lot of customers that work at some serious height and they have in-depth procedures on a emergency rescue from height. So some geezers hanging from some ropes. Have you ever drilled it? No. When do you go on the training? Every 3 years, I think it is. In one industry, it's every 2 years. So you haven't done this let's say you haven't done this for a year and 6 months. And then your best mate who you work with every single day is just falling from the top of a tower and he's hanging from rope, screaming his fucking head off. And you think you're going to respond accordingly. Like, just doesn't, like, even this.
I mean, that's wild, because if we think about other things that we need to rehearse, we have a much shorter cadence for that, and the stakes are probably less high.
Yeah.
Right. So if I think, airline safety briefings, right? If I look at that, that's okay. It's easy to deliver because people are strapped into their seats, but we're doing it every time you get on a plane. Now, of course, that's because some people don't fly that frequently, but there's thought to more frequent cadence. So when you say to me that sort of thing, I would have thought that screams high risk, and we ought to sort of know what we're doing, because, well, actually, maybe whenever the smartest thing to do is counterintuitive, that's when we ought to be training people more. Because actually, if it's obvious what you do, then you probably need less training, right? So if we can assume that the average person in this situation, recognizing that when people are under stress, they might make mistakes, but if the solution's obvious, let's back off that a bit, right? Because the majority of people will do the right thing. But if you've got something that's counterintuitive or a bit unusual, or where, I don't know, the stress might naturally lead people to do something that with hindsight would seem stupid, then we need to do that more often, I think.
Mate, we can't even get businesses do fucking fire drills. We're not going to get them to do that. Do you know what I mean?
It's
It's just
literally like they won't walk out of the building and walk back in again. They won't do that. Like, You ain't getting them to rehearse roll back as rescue. That's
And ultimately, the irony of this as well, which I've experienced twice, one at work at a height drill and the other was for some fire training. So the work at height drill, I said, can we drill an emergency response? The customer was like, yeah, really interested. None of the people, the customer didn't own the sites, they own the labor that goes on the sites. None of their customers would provide us the site to do the exercise. So I was like, that's interesting, because they were like, oh, it's not going to, it doesn't sound safe. Health and safety, they won't let us do it. I'm like, there's a fucking irony in this, isn't there?
Like, isn't there? It's insane. But it's like, we won't let you do it on our site in case something goes wrong.
Something goes wrong. Right?
Yeah.
But we want you to give us the CHAS certificate or whatever to say that you drill this so that you know what to do when something goes wrong. Fucking, we are.
And the
ourselves.
even better example I have of this, is it's just so frustrating, is when I worked in healthcare, we designed a course of in collaboration with a big metropolitan fire service, where we would take building managers into a big fire and rescue training building, and there would be a fire in there, and they could see live how fire doors worked, why they need to keep the corridors clear and all of this stuff. Because there's a big issue in healthcare, particularly in housing as well, of like, people drying their washing in a corridor or whatever, right? So they got to experience and build empathy for the fire and rescue service. They got to see literally how a fire door works. And we saw an instant improvement in engagement in fire safety in the buildings from those people being on that course. The next time we went to book a cohort, we did it like 2 or 3 times. The next time we went to book the next cohort of people to go on, the fire service said, we're not allowed to do it. Our health and safety department said it's not safe to put them in, because some people couldn't get a really tight face fit on the RPE. And we'd acknowledge that and we'd risk assess that. And those people were kept much further away. It was a really controlled situation. There was so many firefighting professionals who literally rescue people from fire as their job, and they were like, no, it's not safe, remove it. And we were just like, we're literally trying to stop you having to go and save these people in a hospital, and you don't want to do your training for health and safety reasons.
Well, ironically, it's probably the people that are going to actually have to do it probably would, right? It's the officials that are looking at this from a theoretical perspective and go, well, that sounds very risky from a legal perspective. And I think
it's from a legal perspective. Yeah.
Yeah. Try dealing with a court case.
Right. And I think it's interesting when you talk, because if I think about another context in which we do test people, so cybersecurity, it seems to be perfectly acceptable for firms to put their employees in positions where they can click on fake phishing emails.
Yeah, right.
That's a common. Now, I have some serious ethical questions about that, because that can veer into entrapment and various other things. But the basic principle of the best way to train you is to put you in a position where you genuinely feel what it's like. And we've then got a much better handle on the risk, and we're training. So I like this idea of making things as realistic as possible, recognizing that there are certain things that we don't want to replicate 100%. And so when you were talking about that, James, I was just thinking, well, that actually makes perfect sense, right? If people have got a real sense of what it involves, it's a visceral experience they've been through, they've seen it. And actually, that is way better than some sort of watch this video of some cartoon characters going through a potential, or hypothetical. Let's lecture you on the hypothetical. Let's actually let you feel it. That's a very human experience. And so I think for me, that points in the right direction, recognizing, again, there's constraints around that. That seems to me a very sensible answer. And if we're not doing that in those contexts, we're acknowledging that we're going for at best second best on these things, if not third or fourth best. Or we're just not looking at issues at all.
The other problem you've got is come back to a paywall again. Like if I went to a small business and said, I'm going to take 5 of your people out of the business for 5 days to do this like proper good intensive like training course is going to transform. They'll be like, fuck off. No way. Like if you do,
they're not having 5 days out of the office or off site, and then 6 months later they'll be gone anyway because of high turnover staffs. Not happening. Not going to.
It's a wicked problem, as Elisa said.
Wicked problem, man. There's no solution.
It's so hard. And you're trying to, like, sometimes I get so like depressed, I think would probably be the best way to describe it. When I've been off social media for so long because I just cannot sit on LinkedIn and watch all these people bicker and celebrate how amazing they are. And then every day go to these small businesses and just wade through treacle every single day when ironically I'm fighting against the people I just saw on LinkedIn who are celebrating how fucking they've just had amazing safety day, but their safety team is making my customer's life a living hell.
Like
And
literally, they're there having their fucking embroidered jackets with like, oh, fucking 1 million hours LTI free and pizzas. And you're over here with your customer being like, fuck you guys.
Mm.
I was gonna say even worse than
It's kind of like, you know, like all these people being environmentalists driving around electric cars, and yet over here there's like coal mines that are like slavery and horrible. It's kind of like
we don't want to think or talk about it, James.
I'm not going to address that stopped, right? Yeah, exactly, right?
Literally ignorant.
It's very much the same as that, in that like these big companies are like, we're so safe and amazing, look at all this stuff, all these badges we've got. And actually there's just this poor small business down here that is just being absolutely pillaged by like small margins, hard work, and drowning in paperwork. And ultimately they're the person that's carrying the saw, breathing in the dust. And it's just like, it's just, yeah.
Wow. So we need to finish this on a positive note. And I think for me, the positive, well, because you know, that's just this. We don't like to leave people despondent at the end of the show. But I think what I think is really interesting though is that you've both got passionate voices about this, and I'm not suggesting that two individuals can whatever the two person equivalent of single-handedly is, dual-handedly.
We can change the fucking world, man.
Right. I think there's something interesting about highlighting this stuff and talking about it. And I think every journey to solving problems starts with at least admitting there is an issue there. And so I do want to say, I think there is something super healthy about the way that you're actually facing up to and having conversations about it. Well, you're living this, right? Because you see it all the time. But I love the fact that you're going out there and talking about it and at least trying to engage people on it. So even if it is one hell of a mountain to climb, and it may not be possible to get anywhere to the top, I'm delighted that both of you are there just fighting the good fight and having these conversations, because if we don't even do that, then nothing's going to happen. At least if you're starting to go this process, something might. Before I let both of you, and thank you so much, right? It's been great fun. I've learned a ton of stuff, feeling sort of overjoyed that I've got some fun people that are trying to look at this issue and treating it with the sense of humor and the sort of challenge that I think it deserves. But before we do that, remind us the names of your podcast, because Elisa, I gather you have one, and I don't think we've talked about that enough. So tell us about your podcast and how people can get hold of you. And let's start with you, James.
Oh, me? Oh, I thought you were going to Elisa first. So the podcast is dead easy. Just Google rebranding safety, YouTube rebranding safety. It's all on there. It's on Spotify, Apple. Our app is called Risk Assessor Pro. You can download it or Google it. And then our consultancy is called Risk Fluent. You can Google that as well. That's it, really.
Elisa?
Cool. My podcast is called Speak, and it's Speak with an exclamation mark. And we're on, all the podcast places and YouTube as well. And then, you can find me on LinkedIn, getting snarky, fucking arguing with people with comments, all that stuff. That's where I'll be.
Love it. Hang out there for some trickle-down inspiration. And other things. Thank you so much, both of you, for one, what you do, but secondly, for being great guests on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gladys.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to James and Elisa for appearing, and to you for listening. To find out more about James and Elisa, the work that they do, and their podcasts, have a look in the show notes. There are links to those there. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To catch up with episodes that you might have missed, visit the podcast website, humanriskpodcast.com. If you like the show and have yet to leave a 5-star review for it, please do on whichever platform you're listening to this on. It really does help other people to find out about the show. I'll be back very soon with another episode, but in the meantime, stay safe and thanks for listening.